Welcome to my second weekly menu video. You guys seem to really like the one I made last week, so I'm going to try to make these more consistently for you. I'm going to show you 5 things we had this week. Starting on Monday, I made myself a Turkish pasta and I made my husband and the kiddos some pasta with meat sauce. This is the pasta I'm using. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I'm going to butcher it. And I just boiled it in some water for about 15 to 17 minutes. I'm not sure exactly. I like mine very soft. I used about 1.5 pounds of ground beef. I buy these from Costco and then I just separate them in little baggies. I'm also going to dice up about 1/4 of a white onion. I like to dice mine very finely because I don't really like to eat big chunks of onion. And then in the pan, I'm going to add some olive oil and just add all of those onions with about 1/2 tablespoon of minced garlic. And I like to use this little meat masher and just start breaking up my meat as finely as I can. I'm going to season this with cumin, paprika, garlic powder, onion powder. I don't really measure when I season, I just kind of season to taste, maybe 1.5 teaspoons of each. And here's where I separated the ground beef. I'm doing 1 serving for me for my Turkish pasta, and then I'm going to leave the rest in the pan for my husband and the kiddos. For the kiddos, I'm just going to be using this Prego sauce. This is probably my favorite pasta sauce. I like to add about 1/4 of a cup of water to that can to really get all of that sauce out. To my ground beef, I liked to cook mine a little bit crispier because I just thought it would taste better with this Turkish pasta. And I added 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. I just kind of cooked it down a little bit. And then I slowly added 2 tablespoons of water, I believe, and I just slowly mixed it all in together on a low heat until it was completely incorporated. It should look something like this once you're done. And then for the Turkish pasta, it requires a butter sauce. So I did 1.5 tablespoons of butter with like 2 teaspoons of paprika. I had the pan on a really low setting and I just let it melt low and slow until it was completely mixed in together. The Turkish pasta calls for a Greek yogurt sauce, and I didn't think my husband was going to like it because he does not like Greek yogurt, so that's why he's not having any. To make the sauce, all you're going to need is some plain Greek yogurt or some whole milk yogurt, along with 1 garlic clove, a few drops of lemon juice, and a pinch of salt. I added half of the container of that plain Greek yogurt. I finely minced that garlic clove and added a little bit of salt and a little bit of lemon and whisked it together. I'm also going to slice up about a handful of these grape tomatoes. And I just like to slice them down the middle. I only did 5 since it was only me eating. To plate up the Turkish pasta, you're just going to add the pasta on the bottom. Then I did the ground beef. Then I added a couple dollops of that yogurt sauce, and then I just poured over the butter sauce, and I garnished with some dried parsley. And oh my god, this was so good, unlike anything I've ever had. It was so fresh. And for the kiddos, I just did the pasta and that meat sauce and just added some Parmesan cheese, and it was actually really good. I also had a plate of this that day, and my husband was able to take some for work the next day. There was plenty of leftovers. On Tuesday, I made oyster chicken over steamed white rice, and I served it up with some cucumbers. The first thing you want to do is dice up about 1/4 of a white onion, a small piece of green bell pepper, and 2 Roma tomatoes. This is a dish my mom made for us all the time when we were growing up, and I don't know if this is actually a thing or if anybody makes anything like this or something similar to this. If you've grown up eating this, please let me know in the comments down below. People would always ask my mom for this recipe, and it's something she just made up on the fly one day because it was easy and convenient, and we always have green bell pepper, onions, and tomatoes for basically everything. We always have it on hand. For the chicken, I'll be using these chicken leg quarters. It was $5.91 for this whole packet, and it's the most affordable cut of meat I've been finding lately at the grocery store. It is a little bit harder to work with. You do have to cut everything yourself, but it's not that bad. I find the joint between the thigh and the leg, and I cut there and remove the chicken leg, and I also like to remove the skin for this specific recipe. The spine is also attached to the thigh, so that makes it a little hard, and I'm not an expert on how to cut chicken, so I just try my best to remove that spine piece from the thigh. And I was noticing that I was leaving a little bit of meat on the spine, and I kept trying to work through it the whole time I was cutting this. But I'm gonna have to watch some videos and figure out how to properly slice that thigh out so I don't lose any of that meat. But regardless, it made 4 chicken legs and I got 4 thighs out of it. And this was everything that I removed, and I just go ahead and toss that. It's just skin and excess fat and bone. I always like to clean my chicken, so I added all of those pieces to a big bowl and I add some water to it and vinegar and I let it sit for about 10 minutes before I start rinsing it out thoroughly. Sometimes when I have the extra time, I like to also clean it out with salt. I didn't have enough time today, so I just cleaned it out with some vinegar and patted it dry. In a big pan, I added some olive oil and I made sure that my chicken was really dry because I'm trying to sear it at this point. I'm searing this in batches. If you add a lot of meat all together, it's not going to sear and it's just going to release a lot of juices and you're not going to get that searing effect. So I'm only doing about 3 to 4 at a time and I'm only seasoning with black pepper. Once all of the meat is seared, I'm going to add everything back into the pan along with all of my diced vegetables. And I'm going to cover and let it cook down for about 4 to 5 minutes on a low heat until all of the vegetables start getting translucent and they'll release a lot of juice, and that's what I'm looking for. I do like to go back in and just move everything around. After 4 to 5 minutes, I'm going to add my oyster sauce, and I'm going to be adding about this much. This is what's going to be remaining on the oyster sauce. So I'm not going to add the whole bottle. And I like to add the sauce right on top of the chicken so you can get this really nice color. So I just add dollops of it. And this oyster sauce is really strong. This is going to be seasoning enough. I cover it, let it cook down for a couple of minutes. And once it's starting to get thick, I add about half a cup to a cup of water. In total, I'm going to let my meat cook for about 20 to 25 minutes until the chicken is cooked thoroughly. Oh, and I also added like a handful of chives. I just add that right in there. I forgot to film that. But yeah, I added the chives. And then for the kiddos, I just shred their meat because they have a hard time eating from the bone. So I do shred their meat and I dish this up with some steamed white rice, some cucumbers. I also like to add that sauce over the rice. It's just so delicious. And we did have enough leftovers for my husband to take to work, so that was really awesome. And there was still 2 chicken legs left over for me and the kiddos to have lunch the next day. On Wednesday, my eldest son requested to be in charge of what we had for dinner, and he picked pizza. So my husband cooked up some frozen pizzas we had in the freezer, and this was such a nice and easy meal. On Thursday, I made fried tilapias. I haven't had fried tilapias in years, and I was so excited when I found these at Costco. First thing I do is clean up my tilapias really good with some vinegar, and I decided to do something a little different with them that my mom used to never do. So it was definitely a little different, but I'll show you anyways. It was about 5 garlic cloves. I squeezed the juice of 1 lemon and I added some salt. I'm using a mortar or a molcajete. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly in English, but it's a molcajete. And I just used it up to mash up all of that garlic and turn it into a paste. And it should look something like this. Once the fish was completely clean, I started patting it dry on both sides and the inside as well. Once I'm done patting it dry, I start cutting little slits on both sides of the fish just because I want to make sure that 1, the paste gets really good into the skin and it has a really good flavor, and 2, because I also want it to fry really nice and evenly, and this just helps it. And then I just grabbed a basting brush and I just started adding all of that paste on the outside of the fish and on the inside as well. Growing up, my mom would just add sea salt to it, and that's what I was kind of used to, so it was definitely a little different. It wasn't bad or anything, it just didn't taste like I remember. Also, I accidentally grabbed farm-raised tilapia when we only used to eat wild caught. So the color threw me off a little bit. Typically the ones that we would buy were like a gray color and these were pinkish, orangish, which was not something I ever had. So that kind of threw me off a little bit, but it was still really good. My husband really enjoyed it. It's just a little different and you will be able to taste that garlicky paste on top. I'm going to heat up a pan and I'm going to be using canola oil. You can use whatever frying oil you like best. But I'm going to get that really hot and then I'm going to add all of my tilapias and cook them for about 7 to 10 minutes per side. For the sides, I'm going to be making macaroni elbow pasta. This is going to be a cold pasta. I boil my noodles first and then I cut up some honey ham. I like to dice mine really finely. This is not typically the ham I like, but this is what my husband brought home. I texted him that I really needed a big pack of ham, so this is what he brought home. After I rinse my noodles, I add them to a big bowl. I add all of my ham. And then I like to add about a cup or so of mayo and I season with salt. And then I had no time to plan ahead. I should have done this earlier in the day and thrown it in the fridge, but because I didn't have a lot of time, I had like 20 minutes until dinner was ready. I threw this in the freezer to let it chill, and it was actually really cold by the time it came out, so it was plenty of time. But if you do have time, try to do this ahead of time and it'll just taste a lot better. And I also seasoned with a little bit of black pepper. This is definitely a Hispanic elbow noodle. I grew up eating this all the time. Sometimes people add onions or corn. This is just the way that I personally really like it. This is what the tilapias look like after cooking for 10 minutes on one side. If they need a little bit more time, give it a couple more minutes. Just make sure it doesn't burn. I also ended up cutting up some cabbage and I added a little bit of lime juice to it and salt. And I paired it with these little grape tomatoes I had left over, and that was dinner. My mom has been craving some pork belly, so on Friday I decided to make some for her. I got this packet of pork belly from Costco. It was $21.06, and it does have a lot of meat. It was almost 5 pounds. And this fed me, my husband, my mom, my dad, and the kiddos didn't really like it, so they only had a little bit, but I ended up making them something different. And I also sent a plate over to my sister, and I have enough for 1 or 2 servings in the fridge still, so it was well worth it. The first thing I did was cube up all of my pork belly and add it to a bowl. I like to grab a couple of pieces at a time and start cubing them up into about 1-inch thick or so pieces. The process is a little tedious because there's just a lot of meat, so make sure you have a really good sharp knife. My brother gifted me this one over the summer, and it's just been really easy to work with. You're going to need a deep pot and fill it up with water and bring that to a boil. Once the water is boiling, you're going to add all of your pork belly, and you let it cook down for about 10 to 15 minutes until it starts releasing the foam and grime. While that is cooking down, I'm going to get started on a sauce. I'm going to do 1/3 of a cup of soy sauce, 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar, 1.5 teaspoons of white sugar, 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, and this was something different that I typically don't do, but I added 1 tablespoon of oyster sauce and 1/2 teaspoon of sesame seed oil. Once all of the grime was coming up, I went ahead and removed it and let the pork belly cook for another 5 to 10 minutes. While that was cooking, I got started on my vegetables. So I diced almost this whole onion. I think I cut up like 2/3 of the onion, along with all of the whites of this green onion. I ended up reserving about 1.5 cups of the water that the pork belly cooked in. In hindsight, I wish I would have saved about 2 cups just because I'll be using this at the end to cook the pork belly in again, and it'll just create a nice thick sauce. I drained my pork belly and then I washed the same pot and I added some frying oil, and in batches I started cooking that pork belly until it developed some nice color. I do wish I would have fried it a little longer. Typically I fry it until it's all nice and really crispy, but this time I just was a little impatient, so I just fried it a little bit until some of it started developing color, and then I added the second batch and did the same thing. This took about 10 minutes or so on medium heat. Once I was happy with the color, I added all of the onions. And then I also minced about 6 garlic cloves. I freshly minced them and I just put it right in the pot. I wish there was an easier way to do this, and if you're using the canned stuff, I'm sure 2 to 3 tablespoons of minced garlic would work just as well. And I mixed everything together until it was fragrant. Then I poured all of the sauce and all of that broth water that I cooked the pork belly in. I didn't have any fresh ginger on hand, but if you do have fresh ginger on hand, use about 1 inch or so thick of a knob and just finely mince that and add it when you're adding the garlic. I just sprinkled a little bit of that ground ginger just to give it a little hint of flavor. Then I'm going to cook this low and slow for 2.5 hours. When there's half an hour left, I like to rectify the flavor and add 2 to 3 tablespoons more of soy sauce and about 1 tablespoon of sugar. I served this over white rice and garnished with chives and paired it with a Caesar salad. This was so amazing. If you guys like these types of videos, please let me know in the comments down below and I will make one for next week.